Hello. Hopefully you have already written some kennings and have watched the videos, so you are aware of the plot of Beowulf. Before we look at a translated version of the text by the Irish poet Seamus Heaney, here is a brief introduction to Old English. As we learned in my last video, Middle English emerged in the period between the year 1100 and 1400. Before this, people who lived in England spoke in variations of what we now call Old English, based on whereabouts in England they lived. 4 different local dialects of Old English are known to us through manuscripts and inscriptions: Northumbrian, from the north and east of England; Mercian, spoken in the modern Midlands; Kentish, from what is now the south east of England; and West Saxon, from the southwest of England. We only know these differences through the different spellings and words each variation used in their writing. There was no dictionary at this time, and there were large differences in the language depending on where you went in England. After the year 900, West Saxon was used as the standard written language and formed the basis for the subsequent developments of the language. Old English is very different from Middle English. It is a Germanic language from the Indo-European family of languages, and, unlike Middle English, it was not influenced in a pronounced way by Latin and French. It was brought to England by settlers who came to Britain in boats from the continent. It is significant, therefore, that a lot of the stories and poems of Old English are about the peoples of Europe and about the sea. Beowulf is no different. It has been said that it is the first great English heroic poem, but that its subject is not England, but men and women from Germanic legend and history. It doesn't take place in England either. As you already know, the poem describes how a powerful warrior from the land of the Geats, a Scandinavian people from what is now southern Sweden, travels to Denmark to defeat a man-eating ogre, and later the man-eating ogre's mother. Old English does not look and sound anything like modern English. It has more in common with modern Icelandic. Here are the first 3 lines of Beowulf in its original Old English. What? We gardena in girdagum, thod kuninga thimge frunon, hutha ethelingas, ellen fremeda. In modern English, this was translated by Seamus Heaney as so: the Speardanes in days gone by, and the kings who ruled them, had courage and greatness. We have heard of these princes' heroic campaigns. These first 3 lines do what all great texts do. They tell their reader what the story will be about and discuss the key themes. Beowulf is a story about valour and bravery in battle, inspirational speeches, thoughts about man's place in the world, a love of the past, and an understanding of transience, that things do not last forever. The structure of the poem, which is written like a story, is similar to that of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, in that it uses alliteration instead of rhyme as a poetic structure. As you can see from the example above, each line in Beowulf is broken into 2 sections, separated by a pause called a caesura, which is also used in modern poetry. Each line has at least 2 stressed syllables, and often 3, which are alliterative for effect. They help the poet to amplify their meaning. The 20th century poet W.H. Auden used this style in his poem The Age of Anxiety. Odorless ages, an ordered world of planned pleasures and passport control, century-go sedatives, soft drinks and managed money, a moral planet tamed by terror. As you can see, Auden uses the same alliterative pattern here. He uses the alliteration to emphasise his disdain, I suppose, and discomfort with the modern world. Odorless ages, an ordered world, planned pleasures and passport control. And we'll see in Beowulf where there's a similar use of what are called plosives, the p and b sounds, to emphasise his displeasure. Now you could try to write a short stanza in the same style about a topic of your choice and submit this to your teacher with your work this week. Let's have a look at an extract from Seamus Heaney's translation of Beowulf. Watch closely, as your task this week will be to analyse this extract to send to your teacher. Here it is. So, the Spear Danes in days gone by, and the kings who ruled them, had courage and greatness. We have heard of those princes' heroic campaigns. There was Shield Sheafson, scourge of many tribes, a wrecker of mead benches, rampaging among foes. This terror of the hall troops had come far. A foundling to start with, he would flourish later on as his powers waxed and his worth was proved. In the end, each clan on the outlying coasts beyond the Whale Road had to yield to him and begin to pay tribute. That was one good king. Afterwards, a boy child was born to Shield, a cub in the yard, a comfort sent by God to that nation. He knew what they had tholed, the long times and troubles they'd come through without a leader. So the Lord of Life, the glorious Almighty, made this man renowned. Shield had fathered a famous son. Beow's name was known through the north, and a young prince must be prudent like that, giving freely while his father lives, so that afterwards in age, when fighting starts, steadfast companions will stand by him and hold the line. Behaviour that's admired is the path to power among people everywhere. So, let's have a look at this text then. This is quite similar to Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, and then it uses that alliterative pattern which was used, as I said, before they used rhyme in English poetry to emphasise meaning. And we can really see where the poet tries to use the alliteration to emphasise ideas. Now, it's the case with Heaney as well. Heaney has borrowed the same style to emphasise the same ideas. So that afterwards in age, when fighting starts, that sound is alliterated there. Steadfast companions will stand by him. And that long laboured S sound is supposed to emphasise the importance of that idea. You'll probably notice that each stanza, irregular in length, they were not the same, emphasises a point about history or a moral, and it does that fairly consistently throughout the text. We have heard of those princes' heroic campaigns. We know about the past. We know about the great glorious past that the people had. Here it says, that was one good king, as it says over here. That was God, König. He was a good king. Why was he a good king? Well, because he emphasised his power. Everyone on the outside had to pay tribute to him and give him money, as it says here, to pay tribute. To pay tribute in those days meant that the people had to give the king money to protect them, keep them safe. And it starts here as well. Behaviour that's admired is the path to power among people everywhere. Look at that, again, the plosive sounds. Path, power, people, real strong emphasis on it. This is what is considered to be good behaviour in this culture at this time. You give tribute, you pay people, you show them respect while your father's in power, so that afterwards they will be loyal to you, and they will, as it says here, be steadfast and loyal and not go anywhere, will stand by him and hold the line. So there's moral messages. That's one of the first structural things, apart from alliteration, is that there's a moral idea or an idea about history at the end of each stanza. And Heaney talks about that here. The Danes have legends about their warrior kings, the most famous was Shield Chieftain, who founded the ruling house. So it begins with like an introduction of the past and an introduction of the history and the heritage of the person that we're hearing about, Beowulf's ancestry and the ancestry of Hrothgar and the other kings. Now there's a lot of words in here as well that the poet has chosen to emphasise ideas. One of the most interesting ones is this word here, thold, which hasn't survived into modern British English, but Heaney receives as a really important word. He was familiar with this word in Ireland, where he was born and brought up. To thole is to fear and to suffer, specifically to suffer. And when he saw that word and recognised it from County Kerry in Ireland, he realised then that Beowulf was something that was relevant to him, something that he could translate. And there are words and ideas all the way through this. You'll probably notice the kenning here as well, whale road, meaning the sea. So there are lots of ideas here that the poet is trying to emphasise to the reader. Another one is this description here in this stanza of Shield Chieftain. He was the scourge. He was someone that was a real problem for many tribes. He was a wrecker of mead benches. Now the mead benches were the places where the nobles would sit with their lord or their king to eat and drink. It's like Heorot was in the story of Beowulf. And these were very important places. They had a great symbolic power. They were symbols of the authority and the wealth and the power of the lord or the king or the prince or whoever was in charge of that part of Europe. So that he was a wrecker of mead benches, this Shield Chieftain, means that he was a real problem for the other lords, the other tribes, the other clans of the area. He was rampaging among foes, another brilliant verb there. This terror of the hall troops, again, terror of the hall troops. He wasn't just a terror of a king, but the hall troops themselves were afraid of this Shield Chieftain. And it says he was a foundling to start with, like an orphan, someone who didn't have parents. He would flourish later on as his powers waxed. You often hear about the idea of the moon waxing and waning. The waxing is the expansion, the growing. And again, his powers were expanding and growing, and his worth was proved. The opposite of waxing is waning. So this was a person who was growing in power, and in the end each clan on the outlying coast beyond the Whale Road had to yield, to surrender to him and begin to pay tribute. So there's all kinds of techniques in here that we see about Shield Chieftain that emphasise his power and his might, his ruthlessness, his strength in battle. And that continues on to the next stanza. Afterwards a boy child was born to Shield, a cub in the yard. Now, cub is an interesting word as well, usually a name given to a young bear. So maybe we see here that this is another threat. A son of Shield is going to be a threat, is going to be a danger. At the moment he's a cub, but he'll turn into a bear. A comfort sent by God to that nation. And this is interesting. Obviously the early years and the Anglo-Saxon years were increasingly Christian. They were becoming Christian over time. So this was absolutely deliberate on the part of the poet. He would talk about that this boy child was a comfort sent by God. And it says, he knew what they had told, the long times and troubles they'd come through without a leader. So the Lord of life, the glorious Almighty, made this man renowned. So look at this again. We've got God, Lord of life, glorious Almighty, made this man renowned. His power isn't just on earth, it comes from God. So those images there of God, power from beyond earth, are deliberate as well. So the poet uses this imagery to emphasise how important this boy child that was born to Shield would be. Shield had fathered a famous son. Beow's name was known throughout the north. Now the north at this time refers to the north of Europe, but at this point to this group of people was almost certainly what the vast majority of the people would have known. They wouldn't have been aware of most of the rest of the world. So if he was known through the north, he was a figure of great significance. So there's lots of little metaphors and subtle little references and carefully used words in this section of the text that are used to emphasise the great warrior kings of the past and this glorious history. Now, in your task this week, not only are you going to have to identify poetic techniques used by the poet, but to explain why the poet has used these techniques in their writing and what they were trying to emphasise. Good luck with the tasks. We look forward to seeing some of your responses.